warm welcome to everyone. My name is Kim Sawyer, and one of my roles at the Pulitzer Center is to mentor our Campus Consortium reporting fellows. I'd like to thank all of you for joining us here tonight to celebrate the work of the 2019 reporting fellows. Our fellows come from 36 universities, journalism schools, HBCUs, schools of public health, community colleges, and liberal arts colleges. They've traveled to 29 countries, from Canada to the Philippines and places in between, Brazil and Estonia and Uganda and Bhutan, to name a few. Could all the 2019 reporting fellows please stand? Congratulations. Your topics are diverse. You are covering migration and displacement, cultural identity, global health and women's empowerment, the impact of religion, human rights, and climate change. You're ambitious, reporting on these big issues. You are going to help create a more just, a more equitable, and a more compassionate world. Your reporting needs to be thorough. It must be fair. It has to include multiple voices if it is to help end discrimination, eliminate food insecurity, ferret out corruption, better educate girls, and demand equal treatment for women, establish economic parity, or reduce carbon emissions. But the devil is in the details. You have had to dig deep. You listen to stories of trauma, experiences you have never had, and ones more difficult than you ever imagined. Virginity testing in Morocco, a ballerina who suffered mental anguish under the brutal Khmer Rouge regime in Cambodia. The fear of a Venezuelan migrant mother bearing a child who will be born stateless. The struggles of the indigenous in Brazil for land recognition. The lack of alternative job opportunities for women rollers of thin cigarettes known in India as bidis. What you have done in the last several months hasn't been easy, finding the right angle, identifying sources, asking questions on sensitive topics, adjusting to new environments. But it's not just about getting the story, it's about telling the story. Writing is hard. Video post-production is hard. Still, there are times when you may think, that was worth it. Some of you will say, this is what I want to be doing. And for that, I'm grateful. We need you. Storytelling can inspire readers and viewers to develop new strategies, modify behavior, reform policy, and think creatively. For storytelling changes hearts and minds. Go. Report great stories, do good works, remember that you have choices, what you do matters. Before I move on, I'd like to thank the Advisory Council and also Pulitzer Center grantees who have served as advisors to our reporting fellows. We appreciate your participation and your wise words. Thank you. And now I'd like to introduce our first speaker, CAMILA DECHALUS. I'm very proud of CAMILA. We met when she was selected to be the 2016 Pulitzer Center American University Fellow. She reported from Columbia on the relationship between coffee production, climate change, and the Catholic Church. Her advisor and documentary film professor, Bill Gentile, is here tonight. Thank you for coming. And congratulations to Camila. She is now a reporter at CQ Roll Call, where she covers immigration and the Department of Homeland Security. She previously worked for CNN and Circa. This summer, Camila received a grant from the Pulitzer Center to report on migrants and asylum seekers on the southwest border near El Paso, and her stories were published in CQ Roll Call. Please welcome CAMILA DECHALUS.
Okay. I'm not usually used to giving speeches, but before I got on stage, I was asked to do a little interview, and one of the first questions was, what does the Pulitzer Center mean to you, and how did it help you in your career? And it took me a second because I remember in 2016, I was a senior at American University, and I wanted to do a million things. And the Pulitzer Center was one of the first times a group of people really expressed how much they believed in me and believed in my potential and the projects that I really wanted to pursue. Like she said, I went to Columbia to study how religious organizations were trying to help local coffee farmers combat climate change and still preserve their crops. And just spending a week fully immersed in a community that has been often ignored by the government, often ignored by news outlets that weren't really showcasing or covering how they felt like their futures were bleak because they saw how much climate change was affecting their livelihood and the chances of making money in the future, was really eye-opening. I mean, I came back from that experience, and it was the first time I really felt that this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to report about communities that are often ignored and really showcase how policies at a federal level were impacting communities at a local level. And I was able to do that 2 times. The first time when I was a senior at American University, just graduating, and now this past summer, working at CQ Roll Call. I'm really deeply honored that Pulitzer Center gave me a second opportunity to go to the border. I mean, right now, I cover immigration legislation on Capitol Hill, and we talk about DACA recipients, dreamers, and asylum policies like the Remain in Mexico policy, but really going to the border and highlighting lives that have been affected by these policies was a completely different experience. I mean, I've examined the Remain in Mexico policy that has already sent more than 50,000 asylum seekers back to Mexico just to wait for their asylum cases to be processed in the US, but really putting faces to these stories. I talked to a Black trans woman from Honduras, which she's only 20, but she's already suffered years of abuse, and she hasn't even left her block in Mexico because she's so scared for her life because of the transphobia in that country. I talked to a father and his son who, after being repeatedly assaulted by a group of armed men in Nicaragua, just solely for them wanting money, made the treacherous journey from Nicaragua to Mexico, only till when they first set foot in Mexico, they were kidnapped just for money. And when they got to the border to present their case and hoping to seek some type of asylum for everything that they've been to, they were then asked to go back to Mexico to wait for a number of months just to have their asylum case heard in immigration court, and they still don't know what's going to happen to their lives. And so, once again, the Pulitzer Center gave me a platform and the means to really tell these stories. And, you know, I always kind of tell people that in the media or just in life, a lot of people glamorize what it's like to be a journalist, to go out in the field and really tell these stories, but there's also a mix of guilt. There's a mix of laying in your bed knowing that you're going back to your apartment that's fully furnished, knowing that the people that you've interviewed hours before don't even know where their next meal is coming from. And these stories stick with you. And I always say that it's worth it if I can just inform just one person about what's really going on so they can make an educated decision or really stay informed about the topics that are going on in the current news cycle. As a journalist, over the years, I mean, I've worked at different outlets, but you learn to check your own biases. You try to get a different perspectives on a certain issue, whether it's talking to Democrats or Republicans, so you can inform readers about what's really going on and get different perspectives. But as a journalist of color, you also learn to navigate just different spaces while also being authentically you. And as a journalist of color who's also a woman, you learn how to stand up for yourself and defend your work and pursue your passions, even though you know that there's not that many of you in the industry that you're working at. So I really want to say thank you, Kem, and thank you, John, for really believing me and supporting my work. Because I think without you guys, I don't think I would have had the confidence to really go out and really pursue my dreams. So thank you.
My name is Holly Piepenburg, if you haven't already met me, and I'm the Pulitzer Center's Outreach Coordinator. Our reporting fellows might know me as the individual who emails them on a weekly, sometimes daily basis, so it's really wonderful to meet you all in person. I'm also very thankful for the opportunity to introduce our next speaker tonight. Jacqueline Charles began her journalism career as a 14-year-old intern at the Miami Herald. Now she's the Herald's Caribbean correspondent, a Pulitzer Prize finalist, an Emmy Award winner, and a Pulitzer Center grantee. Last year, she traveled to Haiti, where hundreds of women die from cervical cancer every year. There is no radiation therapy or access to the HPV vaccine in Haiti, but certain organizations are working to overcome the cultural and economic barriers that often keep women from pursuing treatment and prevention. As the daughter of a cervical cancer survivor, Jacqueline's work spoke to me in a profound way, and I'm sure other readers have been just as moved. But as much as I could go on and on about Jacqueline's exceptional accomplishments, I'll let her do the rest of the talking. Jacqueline.
Hi, good evening. All right, so if I mess up tonight, please forgive me, because if your name is not Haiti or violent protest, I'm kind of lost. I literally have been covering a violent protest in Haiti for, I guess, going on, well, officially they say 5 weeks, but considering that I was in Haiti a week before everything started and it was dealing with a fuel shortage, this is my 6th week. So first of all, let me just say good evening to everybody. And I'm really grateful to be here. I have to tell you, I spent the last year visiting with a number of college students as who are part of the Pulitzer Center grant project, and I kept saying, oh my God, I would never graduate from college if I had this opportunity. So I'm a proud graduate of UNC Chapel Hill. Yes, thank you. And the extent of my foreign reporting experience was going to Cuba and Mexico over spring break. It was wonderful. It was, and the funny thing is I actually had to read this book by Andres Oppenheimer, and I now work with Andres Oppenheimer, and I'm like, I have to read your book? But he's great. So I just want to say that you guys have a really great opportunity here, and so it's fascinating because my first reporting assignment overseas did not come until after I graduated from college. So most days I say that I have the best job in journalism. I cover the Caribbean, right? What do you think about when you hear the Caribbean? Sun, surf, and tourism. I mean, this year alone, I've written stories about a plastics ban in Jamaica. I hung out at a club in Montego Bay, where in one room they're playing music, in the other room they're smoking things called Girl Scout cookies and wedding bells, and then the owner turns to me in the middle of the interview and says, do you smoke? And I'm like, no. Why are you doing this story? I keep asking myself that too, right? But as a journalist, I was fascinated by the fact that Jamaica was the first country in the Caribbean that legalized marijuana, and I wanted to know what it was like. And then I also cover a country called Haiti. And unfortunately, the narrative around Haiti has been negative. It's been about protests, natural disasters, and dysfunction. And also for me this year, as well as last year, it was a story about cancer. When I talked to Kim about what I should talk about, she says, talk about your last trip. And I was going to save this for tomorrow, but I will talk about it tonight. So my last trip, I went to Haiti as part of another Pulitzer grant project, and I found myself in the midst of a fuel shortage, and I couldn't get around. And we thought there was going to be a hurricane in Haiti, but it hit the Bahamas. And then I got a text message after a couple of days there, and it was from a nurse in Miami who was helping to take care of a cancer victim that I had written about, this young boy called Julie. And she says, Jacqueline, Julie's not doing well. And I said, well, I'm in Haiti. She says, can you please go and see him? And I said, okay. I have a lunch with an ambassador that day, and then after that I rode with my driver an hour and a half to where he lived, and when I arrived, he literally was dying before my eyes. He was on the ground, and I turned to his mother and I said, did you call the doctor? And she says, I did. I called the doctor. I said, well, what did the doctor say? And she says, well, the doctor said, we told you we can't do anything about him, so don't bring him here. And bringing him here would have required her to get on a public bus for 3 hours. So on my way to see him, I had texted this Good Samaritan who wants to remain anonymous. But after I had written my initial story, he had reached out to me. And apparently, by the way, this guy is not a fan of mine. I later learned he did not like my reporting overall. But he was moved by the story about Julie, and he wanted to see how he could help. And so he had been helping the family throughout. And so I had texted him and I said to him, listen, Julie's not doing well, I think he's dying. And so when I arrived at the family house an hour and a half later, it's out on the outskirts of the capital of Haiti, my internet was finally working again. And the gentleman said to me, should I call Dr. Gasson, who was the pediatric oncologist, who when I met her at the beginning of my reporting, she did not want to take on his case because he was too old, he was this, he was that. And then later on, she'd gotten involved. And I said, yes, please reach out to her. So he's talking to the pediatric oncologist. I'm talking to the director of the hospital. And at this point, we basically decided that this kid is not going to make a 3-hour ride, into the central part of the Haiti to his hospital that was founded by Paul Farmer, who's a very well-known anthropologist from Harvard who works in Haiti. So long story short, I'm in the middle, I'm the reporter, right? But I am not the reporter in this instance in a way. I'm here, this kid is dying, and the mother is helpless, and he's got younger siblings, and they're watching him die. And I'm like, this is just not right. And I'm on the phone with the director of the hospital, and I'm telling her how bad it is. So she's setting the ambulance, and then the ambulance is supposed to get on its way, and then on its route, it sees an accident, and it thinks that they sent them to deal with the accident. So they stop and deal with the accident, go back to the hospital. By the time they arrived to the kid, it was like literally 3 hours later. So the Good Samaritan, God bless him, had decided that this kid was not gonna make it very far, and he says, I will take care of his hospital expenses, but he has to stay in the capital close to home. So the hospital gets there, the ambulance gets there, they take him to the hospital, and then they have to go get morphine, so I have to go to another hospital to get morphine. And his 14-year-old sister, who I had given instructions to, she calls me and says, I'm here, but the security will not let me in to get the morphine. So now I have to call the oncologist, get on the phone with the oncologist, and she gets on her other phone, screams at somebody, and eventually they get the morphine. And then the next morning, at like 6:47, the mother calls me and she says, Julie just died. And I have to tell you, it was really heartbreaking. And, for me, I was like, oh, okay. So on the one hand, I would say, you know what, at least I was there, and I was able to facilitate this, but it angered me that I had to be there to facilitate this. Otherwise, this kid would have died on the ground. But because of my story, which was funded by the Pulitzer Center, I have to tell you, before I wrote the story, kids in Haiti who were above the age of 14 and were suffering from pediatric cancer had absolutely nowhere to go. They were turned away. Doctors told parents that children do not die of cancer. There's no such thing. The only hospital in the country, which has 11 million people, by the way, that dealt with kids with cancer, had 10 beds. And Julie, because when I met him, was basically 16, and his mother had spent almost a year trying to get a diagnosis and couldn't get a diagnosis for Burkitt's lymphoma. He was too old and he was too tall to be treated, and the same oncologist initially turned him away. And after I wrote my story, and when a simple tweet where it says that they're now about to cut into his face, a procedure that we stopped doing in the United States in 1970. She sent me a text and she said, Jacqueline, I just saw this text that they're about to cut in his face. I said, yeah. I said, you know, the tumor came back and they need to do something. And she says, no, stop. And she actually got involved. And she didn't just get involved, but she trained a younger doctor at a hospital, Mille Ballet, which is run by Paul Farmer, to treat this boy. And today, because of that story, because of the Pulitzer Center grant, you know, kids today in Haiti over the age of 14 now have a fighting chance for cancer. So, you know, so I tell you that story just to tell you sort of the power of journalism and what it can do. I didn't set out to save anybody's life. I had an idea 5 years ago about what is it like to have cancer in a country where nobody ever dies of a natural death. It's always something mystical, it's always something else, and people can't even find money for transportation. And in telling the story, I met this kid, and you know, and tomorrow during the panel, I'll give you the background on how it all happened, sort of happenstance. But, you know, he's no longer with us, but his legacy lives, and because of that, hospitals and nonprofits that used to compete against each other now work together. It's not perfect. Not every kid is going to survive, but because of one article, people felt compelled to change the system and to do something. So for all of you young journalists that are here in this room, I just want to tell you that to continue to tell the stories that you want to tell, to have the courage to tell the stories. People are not going to like you, they're not going to like your stories, but you're not in this business to be liked or to be loved. You're in this business to tell the truth. So continue to do that. Thank you.
But thank you all for being here this evening. And I realize we are on a tight schedule this weekend, but to our reporting fellows, I do want you, hopefully you'll get some time to see the sights around town and to get out and about. And even if you're just walking back and forth from the Adams Inn, you never know what motorcades, windows you can look through, or what politicians you might see walking on the street, or even what journalists you might find in stores, where I met our next speaker one time when we were shopping by happenstance, rather than at so many of our Pulitzer Center events this evening. So it's a great pleasure to introduce Linda Winslow, who is an inspiration to all of us here. And throughout her career, she's been involved with the coverage of many events around Washington, D.C. and the U.S. and around the world, including Watergate, and also her work with both the McNeil-Lehrer Report as one of its original producers, and ultimately working through the NewsHour with Jim Lehrer, and then planning and overseeing the transition to the PBS NewsHour, which has been a great partner with the Pulitzer Center through these years. And Linda retired a few years ago, but that does not mean, retired from her day job, I should say, at the NewsHour a few years ago, but that doesn't mean she hasn't been keeping busy. Linda is a Pulitzer Center board member. She is a dedicated alum to Columbia University and has been honored through the university and elsewhere for her excellence in journalism. She's paying all of that forward with her support of our partnership at Columbia Graduate School of Journalism, with her support and mentorship of our student fellows from Columbia. And it is an honor to introduce her. So please welcome Linda Winslow.
Well, thanks, Ann, and welcome. Thank you, everybody, for that welcome. I came tonight with props, a prop anyway. This is a way of illustrating how much has changed since I graduated from Columbia's J School in 1967. This is what we recorded our television programs. I just discovered it's a really great weightlifting program. It's a 2-inch videotape. And if I could find a machine that would play it back, and I can't, I could record everything that's on that tape on this cell phone and have lots of storage left over. The technological changes that have shaped the way journalism, and particularly broadcast journalism, is conducted today have been phenomenal. But as I look back at my career, however, it's not the technology I remember. Excuse me. It's the stories I covered and the people I worked with that helped me understand the awesome responsibility that goes with being a journalist. One of those stories was Watergate, as Ann mentioned. 45 years ago, on a warm August night, I was driving past the White House. Inside, Richard Nixon had just finished telling the nation he would resign the presidency the following day. I had just finished producing public television's coverage of his speech. And I remember feeling very sad, not for Nixon, but for myself. After 2 years of round-the-clock coverage of break-ins and cover-ups and secretly recorded Oval Office conversations, 2 years of daily lessons about the balance of powers and the definition of an impeachable act, the Watergate story was ending. I was barely 30 years old. In the years to come, how could any other story possibly top that one? Okay, so I wasn't a very good fortune teller. Neither was the guy who conducted my first job interview after I graduated from the J School. He was the news director of a commercial television station in New York, and I had applied for a job as an associate producer. He studied my glowing recommendations from my Columbia professors, looked up, and told me I was in the wrong department because, quote, "You've got the wrong plumbing to be a producer," unquote. And then he asked how many words per minute I could type. That was par for the course for female journalists back then, and we've all got a dozen stories like that. There weren't very many of us in any newsrooms, much less television studios. Soon, however, I landed a job in non-commercial public television. It was just getting off the ground in 1967. Budgets were tight, the equipment was out of date, and salaries weren't great, but probably for all those reasons, women were welcome. True, men were mostly running everything, even in public television, but at least women were at the table. Plus, the people in charge weren't driven by the need to maximize ratings every time they made a programming decision. That's why only PBS aired the Watergate hearings in their entirety in prime time, not just during the day, in prime time when most Americans were home and could pay attention. When I saw the impact that simple decision had on public opinion, I became a true believer in the possibilities of non-commercial broadcasting. The Watergate hearings introduced me to two other true believers, Robert McNeil and Jim Lehrer, who co-anchored the PBS coverage. During breaks in the months-long testimony, they had been hatching a plan for a news show that would truly be an alternative to commercial television news. In 1975, we launched the program that today is known as the PBS NewsHour. As Ann said, it was then called the McNeil-Lehrer Report. Originally, the idea was to focus on one important news development for a half hour each day, and through thoughtful interviews with a wide range of people, help the audience understand how complex some issues really are. It sounds kind of quaint today, doesn't it? In any event, PBS gave us the time and opportunity to earn a reputation for credibility and fairness. I believe those are the basic ingredients for a successful news operation even today. We were short on technological glitz, but our audience recognized that the core purpose of journalism is to hold powerful people and institutions responsible for their actions. Technology can help you do that more quickly and effectively, but it is no match for a curious mind determined to ask tough questions and uncover facts. And I do mean facts. There's no such thing as an alternative fact. Lofty goals aside, however, the aforementioned plumbing issue came up again in 1988. Robert McNeil and I were in Moscow covering the final summit between Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev. Along with about 3,000 other Western journalists, we were staying in the Hotel Russia, which is a moldering heap of a building directly across from the Kremlin. At 3 o'clock in the morning, I was awakened by our cameraman. The antique toilet in his bathroom was constantly running, and it was keeping him awake. So I asked, "What do you expect me to do?" And his response, "You're the producer, fix it." "No problem," I told him. "We switched rooms." I explained that women had more practice putting up with adversity on the job. Over the years, I'm happy to say the industry has evolved, and so has the NewsHour. Today, a very diverse staff delivers a full range of stories on many different platforms. I am proud to have had a hand in that evolution, but I'm even prouder of the work being done to engage new audiences by the current NewsHour team, led by my successor, Sarah Just. If you missed, for example, the extraordinary series on China that aired a few weeks ago, I urge you to look it up online. I'm very pleased to say that the Pulitzer Center's financial support made it possible. Today, when I looked at the projects that you all have produced with the Pulitzer Center's help, I am gobsmacked. You are so talented and so lucky to be alive right now, to borrow a phrase from Hamilton. There has never been a better time to be a journalist, aided and abetted by all the wonderful technological advances that have come along since I got started. So I urge you to sign up for a career in journalism, but when you do, please keep in mind something that one of my broadcast heroes, Edward R. Murrow, sagely observed about the technology he was working with in 1954. Quote, "Just because your voice reaches halfway around the world doesn't mean you are any wiser than it reached only to the end of the bar." Thank you very much.